Hey, what's up, everybody? So, in today's episode, I'll be once again going over role proficiency analysis in competitive gaming. And I'll be touching on various different roles that comprise a lot of teams, organizations, and guilds, especially when it comes to the highest echelons of competition. What I kind of want to touch on as well now, just to make sure I put the reminder out there, is that players will comprise themselves, especially individualistic perspective, right? Of multiple roles. Just to preface, everybody will be multifaceted in that regard. So not everyone is a one-trick pony, essentially, right? Just to make sure everybody's on the same page in that regard, just to make sure that they don't tunnel vision themselves into thinking that they can only theorycraft, or they can only innovate, or they can only execute, because people are, once again, multifaceted. So in this episode, I'd actually like to delve in on how to be a successful execution specialist. Now, same with Theory Crafter, that role tends to be one of the most common as well. And the reason being is because a lot of people tend to put a lot of passion, focus, and repetition towards their grind, especially when it comes to technical advancement of their skills. Now, here's the thing. A lot of successful players out there tend to do very repetitive motions, very repetitive practice sessions, and delve a lot into, for example, bettering their aim, movement, or just in general decision making skills in the midst of battle. So make sure just to keep in mind of those three specific things that I just said. Now, what I'd like to go in pretty much like a step-by-step basis is to showcase the most success one can essentially attain when specifically going down those three pillars. Technical execution skill when it comes to initiating combat, whether it be like aiming or just various surface level perspective when it comes to the technical, right? The movement, which adds another layer towards your combat ability to ensure that your aim and all of that, that surface level, is gives more opportunity and windows of opportunity to be able to capitalize upon. And then thirdly, your ability to adapt in whatever environment you see fit based off your ability to think accordingly in whatever situation you find yourself in, whether it be ultra chaotic or niche specific, especially when it's long range and you're a sniper, for example, right? So, the first thing that I do want to touch on is that first step. When you're looking at trying to be a successful execution specialist, you need to think about how you're going to work on your surface level technical skills. And when it comes to a shooter, for example, we're talking about your aim, your ability to flick, your ability to legitimately track someone with a full auto gun or a burst gun, or being able to control your recoil, or being able to understand how to accommodate for the spray pattern of various specific guns. You're going to need to get those down to a T as much as possible. But here's the thing. A lot of people tend to think that all is needed in order to really get good at this is purely just banging your head against the wall, brute forcing 99% of the time. That is unfortunately not the case. When you think at it from a practical standpoint, when you're applying yourself, especially when you're trying to improve your surface level technical skills, you need to account for a lot of other things, and that includes your sensitivity as well as essentially how you sit, how you essentially body form, kind of like in sports. And you know how there's a lot of stances when it comes to fighting, for example, and there's a lot of various different techniques that you can apply. Like, let's say you're an orthodox boxer and you take a specific stance where your left is now being held as the backhand. Well, that's a completely different scenario that's not entirely accustomed, especially when you're orthodox, because your right hand is definitely the primary strength when it comes to hitting your knockout shots, or hell, even UFC, right? So you're essentially putting yourself in a very interesting um, situation that is not necessarily conducive to being attuned to what you're used to. And what I'd actually like to touch on more so, especially when it comes to mastering your surface level aspects, is you need to take account of what you're comfortable with. So when you're thinking about a sensitivity, you need to make sure that you think of something that works well with your reaction in real life. Think about it. when you're reacting to something as fast as you can, especially when you're catching a ball with your hand, there's a certain speed that you're used to, a certain way that you're used to doing it, right? Applying that to sensitivity and how fast you can flick, therefore, is a very similar way of going about it, especially when you apply it or like see it in a similar way as flicking a shot. If it's too fast, you're overcompensating and you're not able to hit the shot, especially when you flick. However, when you're too slow, you're not going to be able to get there in time before you get fucking annihilated by someone who's really good. It needs to be just right. And many times it actually will lead to a lot of minuscule adjustments when it comes to sensitivity, and people cannot be scared to go down that path, especially when it comes to getting better at those surface level technical skills. You need to be able to get to a point where you're comfortable and you feel like whatever you're playing and however you're playing is attuned to your actual, natural, real life reactions and reflexes. It just is essentially your own avatar. The avatar of you that you're trying to project into the game. So you're as close to being that character in terms of reaction time, like as you are in real life. That's just how it's supposed to be. Get comfortable with that. And what's interesting is that when you start going into the next step, where you legitimately start applying movement to your aim. Let's say your aim is really comfortable and you've managed to get to a point where it's very reminiscent of how you are in real life. And you're legitimately able to just not really think too much when you're applying your aim because you're just so used to how you're being able to do things. Imagine when you start applying movement. Movement fundamentally also revolves around the same mythos or methodology when it comes to approaching your surface level techniques. You get to a point where you understand which movement specialties or techniques that you tend to gravitate towards and are really good at. You focus more on what you feel like you would enjoy implementing in your gameplay, especially when you have a preference towards how you go about combat, whether you have proficiency in long range, proficiency in close, mid, whatever. You use movement tactics to amplify your gameplay, and you don't let it hinder your aim too much. You don't try to. It's very important for you to personalize and essentially create individualistic approaches towards how you're going about things. And I genuinely think when you apply, like in Apex, let's say, let's bring in the example of you going into Apex and trying to master your movement. When you're a player that loves to play the long mid range and you're more of a passive mentality, you most likely will need to get used to super glides and especially just like sliding off of ledges the second you mantle, so you get that little boost when you slide off of just so you can figure you have that ability to close the distance or create distance, create space between you and the enemy, in any way, shape, or form. It's not entirely necessary for you to wall bounce. It could be, especially if you have a character that boosts you forward, either be Octane's jump pad or Revenant's jump, but it's not necessary. But there's certain moves that you can definitely accommodate for, especially when it comes to not trying to get hit by enemy, like when you what is it when you bunny hop around and you kind of just jitter click your way across the Sahara, for example, especially pre-Apex, like past Apex, or like in various different games where you can bunny hop. Movement is important to applying yourself towards ensuring that you also open up a lot of windows of opportunity for split second shots. If you're a good shot and your reflexes are as close to what is in real life, you're going to be able to hit some nutty shots just right out the gate go, or right right out the gate. And that's the thing, right? When you can actually hit those shots, especially when you're mid slide and you decide to go for a quick flick or a quick scope with a sniper or a quick shotgun flick to the right side when you notice that you're sliding across one piece of cover to another and you hit the shot, dude, that could turn the entire fight around in the blink of like in the blink of an eye. It could legitimately contribute to so much value, especially when you master being able to understand movement. And now we get into the third step, the adaptability, the ability to stay cool within combat. So what I mean, right, when you're being cool under combat is that your movement and your execution is so natural to you now, and it's second nature that you don't really need to think too much on how you need to go about things. You just do. And the things that you're really working on is strategy it becomes pure psychological warfare, and your execution is at a point where you're only thinking about what are the next two steps ahead. And you're essentially thinking, right, two steps ahead of your opponent, potentially three or four if you're literally locked in. Here's the interesting part, right? This is an execution specialist and someone who can legitimately do a lot. But that's the highest level. That's the highest level in anything when it comes to competition. When you get to a certain level, everybody's surface level technical skills will be close to par and they'll be equalized in some way, shape, or form, especially if it's a team scenario. Or hell, even if it's like in terms of like value when it comes to 1v1s. There's a lot that ends up becoming equalized, especially when you take into consideration your ups and downs on specific days, right? Like for example, like you could be good, really good one day, your opponent could be really bad that day, and you'll just shit on the other opponent. But then they're really good another day, and you're shit next day, and they fuck you up. You know what I mean? It's like when you're at the highest level, things tend to equalize. And when things tend to equalize, the thing that ends up differentiating the best of the best versus others is legitimately how well they can strategize, how well you can think on the dime, how well you can legitimately implement your strategies right then and there. And the difference between this and a theory crafter is that these people need to be in the midst of combat in order to activate this critical thinking that occurs in the split second. Theory crafters and strategists who only like tend to do long-term strategy, which tends to be most theory crafters, this is less more so theory crafting and more so just executing in the midst of a very specific situation or a very chaotic environment. Can you imagine, right? If a player is so high level that all they're really doing is kind of just vibing to some Tyler the Creator, for example, and they're just popping up, doing crazy movements, making some crazy shots, and thinking three steps ahead of another team, pub stomping them into oblivion and killing like five people by themselves without the help of any of their team? Can you imagine a five-man that works in tandem and is able to actually understand each other in a very similar wavelength style and be able to implement whatever tactics they think of without having to say much? That is the key, and that is the epitome of being at the highest level and actually being able to implement so much competitively and being that good. That's the thing, right? That's how you become a very successful execution specialist in pretty much everything. And I mean, this also applies to PvE, you have to remember. Because if we're talking about surface level technical skill, you still need to be really good at being able to do what you do, especially when it comes to not having to think too much and doing your combos, for example, or doing attack patterns or doing whatever, right? And then movement, needs to come second nature for you to dodge if you're doing PvE on Dauntless or like Dark Souls or anything, right? And then when it comes to thinking two steps ahead, it means you're not worrying about what your character is doing. You're literally just staring at the boss for 99% of the fight because you already know your character's going to be fine because your surface level technical skill and your movement is on fucking lock. And that's the thing. People legitimately need to understand what they need to do and how successful people do it at a level like this. Theory and the nitty gritty. A lot of people tend to not really delve too much on this and tend to spend too much, trying to bang their head against the wall, for example, at trying to follow what was already established when it comes to, in order to be good, you need to keep grinding tilted, or in order to be good, you need to keep landing fragment west or fragment east in Apex. That's not the case. That's not the case. There's so much more to that, and there's so much more practicality when it comes to understanding how to get better. And that's essentially what I feel like what I know an execution specialist needs to go through in order to legitimately be that good. Not banging their head against the wall, but actually taking the time to consider the logic and practicality when it comes to them getting to a level where they can compete at the highest echelon. And that's pretty much my 2 cents. That's essentially what a successful execution specialist is. And those guys, when it comes to being part of a team, guild, organization, you need those guys. You need those people who are able to think on the dime. Because a lot of people say they can think on the dime, but it's like there's levels to it, especially when it comes to people able to be on the same wavelength and be super ultra coordinated without saying a goddamn thing in their communications. When you see teams like that, borderline unstoppable when you're not on that level because it seems like they're just reading your mind. You go in and yeah, your technical skill may be really good. Your movement may be really good, right? You might actually be able to get to a point where you're only focused on working on your third skill. That's the difference between a god level player versus someone who's like diamond or master too. A god level player will play you like a fiddle, and you'll just be doing one dimensional surface level type of strategies that everyone kind of knows, and it's just going to be super freaking easy to predict what you're going to do next. And these players that are cool under the environment, no matter how chaotic it is, will just be able to read you easily, kind of like in a fighting game. And that's what people need to realize. That's what a lot more people need to realize. And that's legitimately how the perspective towards becoming a pro is. It has to be, you have to be fast, you have to be good, and you have to legitimately take yourself in a critical way where excelling is purely dependent on whether or not you actually can see the skills performing based off you not thinking too much on what you're doing. Second nature, essentially. Being able to get to a point where you really freaking know what you're doing without having to really explain it too much or needing to like convince yourself that you're good because you can only do this little one move, but in reality you can do it without really giving a damn, and it's not really worth much to you because it doesn't seem like it at first. But to many people it does, because all of a sudden when you're wall bouncing all like everywhere, and to you it seems like, oh, this is simple. I don't really care too much about wall bouncing anymore now that I know it to a T. And to other players who don't know how to wall bounce, they just see you jump in between buildings like Spider-Man, and all of a sudden they pump you in the face for 10,000 damage. Yeah, GG's to those guys. You know what I mean? But anyways, that's pretty much my rant about how to be a successful execution specialist. I thank you guys for taking the time to actually listen to this. I'm actually trying to pull out more passionate and testing a lot of stuff out, working out the kinks when it comes to my content and my commentary, especially when it comes to explaining the type of stuff. I plan on touching back on a lot of these. And trying out different methods of explaining just to make it so that that can reach more of an like a wider audience potentially, or maybe more specific audience, or hell, maybe even just break it down into smaller videos so you guys can really understand what I'm trying to say. But this is essentially just my first foot in the door when it comes to talking about these specific successful roles that people really just need to know. And it's just, in order to get better, I really feel like people just need to understand these to a T. But anyway, guys, thank you so much for taking the time once again. I really enjoy talking about execution specialists specifically because um, it's just fun to be able to touch on that, because I feel like a lot of people are like that, are essentially trying to be better at specializing in execution. But yeah, thank you so much once again, guys, for listening, and I really hope everybody has a great night. And I'll see you guys in the next video. Take care.